Welcome back to another episode of the NRG Oncology Podcast. As part of our effort to keep up with the rapidly changing landscape of national healthcare policy, Stephen and I have this episode with the CEO of another major cancer organization. Today, we welcome Dr. Vivek Kavadi, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the American Society of Radiation Oncology, or ASTRO. ASTRO is the largest radiation oncology society in the United States, with a massive academic, educational, and advocacy footprint. Dr. Kavadi has a truly unique background as a community-based radiation oncologist in the U.S. Oncology Network, who is a longtime NRG Oncology investigator as well.
For full disclosure, Dr. Kavadi and I are collaborators at NRG Oncology, and we have been co-authors on a number of publications. Dr. Kavadi, I first wanted to explore your relationship with NRG Oncology. In that context, how has being an NRG Oncology investigator made sense for you as a community-based radiation oncologist like myself in Sugar Land, Texas? How did you make NRG Oncology trials work, and what have been the pros and cons of NRG Oncology for your practice?
Well, first off, thank you, Stephen and Lauren, for the invitation. I look forward to this conversation. NRG Oncology has been a topic of my career that has been very special to me. I think I would go back to 2007, before it was NRG Oncology and was RTOG. At that time, our practices in the US Oncology Network were widespread across the country, and they were majority freestanding centers in the community. And there wasn't really a good opportunity for our doctors to participate in radiation research. We had a robust medical oncology research program that was mostly funded by pharma, and the network had great opportunities for medical oncology research, but similar opportunities did not exist for radiation oncology research. Over a period of several years, we had conversations about what we should be doing to enable those offerings. And the reality was that radiation oncology research was really primarily done in a cooperative group setting. And RTOG was the dominant entity offering that opportunity. So, what we had to do was create an environment by which our doctors who were interested could actually participate. The challenge with community practice settings is oftentimes you don't have an existing research infrastructure. And to do any type of research does require that infrastructure, whether it's an IRB, regulatory support, CRC support, and the recruitment and consent and follow up and all of the things that go into a robust research program may or may not exist in a community setting and often does not. So we made a strategic decision that research was important to our doctors. It continued their path towards their contribution to the specialty, their interest in the intellectual aspects of participating in research. And many doctors that enter private practice do so for reasons that are not necessarily affiliated with not wanting to do research or not liking to do research. If anything, they are interested in it, but they need to do it in a different way. So the task that I was given was to create that program. And so this started in the summer of 2007. I attended RTOG for the first time and really established a close relationship with Wally Curran. That relationship over the subsequent 18 years has been fruitful for both of us, and I consider him a colleague and a friend, and I always enjoy our opportunities when we are together to discuss a variety of topics. But what we discussed was something unique. What I went to him with was a request to do a network relationship with RTOG rather than an individual relationship. This was something that RTOG did not have a legacy for doing. And so there was a great deal of conversation and some level of negotiation to enable a model that didn't exist before. And from the RTOG perspective, there were reasonable concerns. One was, are private practitioners truly interested? We had to demonstrate that. Number two was, how do you start a network type of contract when that doesn't exist today? And number three, who would then be regulating the members of this network? And fortunately, we had solutions for all of those. We said that we would manage the program centrally, that the QA would be managed centrally, the IRB would be managed centrally, the regulatory would be managed centrally, and that RTOG would deal with me and the chief of our program from a CRC perspective, and they wouldn't necessarily have to deal with all the individual sites independently like they would otherwise. And we also committed to them that we would self-govern, which means that we would evaluate our sites for quality and for accruals, and that we would self-govern and address deficiencies in either of those areas. And if we were not able to address those deficiencies at the extreme end, would have to remove those sites, but we would do that ourselves. And this foundation of a relationship, which was really very much one-on-one between me and Wally, as well as Steve King at the ACR, we all went out on a limb and started something from scratch. And lo and behold, it grew from 10 pilot sites to a very robust program. But what we found was even between 10, 15, 20 sites that we were able to accrue many patients to trials. We, as a network, treated many patients in the community. So it provided a great opportunity for those doctors and, more importantly, for those patients to have access to RTOG trials, and that program started at that time, and we were proud participants, and I think it benefited everybody. And if anything, it also benefited our network in the sense of the prestige that we earned by contributing to the advancement of science.
I really want to commend you for all the work that you've done with NRG Oncology. And I hope that hearing all of that really opens the eyes of community-based radiation oncologists out there who might be wanting to be involved with NRG Oncology too. What sort of advice would you give specifically to community-based providers out there who want to try to get involved on a higher level?
What I would say is that the patients exist. They have the patients that could be enrolled on trials. The challenge for community providers fundamentally is the infrastructure support. And it's hard to do that in a freestanding environment unless you're part of a larger network or you're part of a community CCOP, because you do need all of those support personnel to do the program well. So if you are part of a large entity, you can participate through that entity. If you're not part of a large entity, I find that the CCOP avenue is a feasible one that many people do quite well in. In the absence of those two, I think you would have to be truly committed, and you would have to expend the resources to have the support that you need. It's not that it can't be done, but it does require a commitment of time and resources. But a passion can cover a lot of those challenges, and it is incredibly rewarding when you do participate.
Again, I just want to echo Lauren's sentiments and reiterate my admiration for your ability to engage and support NRG oncology trials in the community setting. In fact, it's been somewhat of an inspiration for the work that I try to do in one of the integrated satellites at my institution. I'd like to next turn to your role as the CEO of ASTRO. What made you apply for this job, and what does this job entail for you so far? Tell us about your vision for the first year on the job.
Stephen, these jobs are not ones that anybody aspires to, because there aren't that many of them and they don't open up that frequently. I would say that for the last 20 plus years, I've been involved in medical leadership and a variety of executive roles. In every one of those, the goal was always to have an impact and hopefully to scale that impact. And hence, US Oncology, the Radiation Network, we went from a network that had two central employees to a network that at its peak had 260 radiation oncologists at 160 sites. So for me, the interest has always been, how do we make a contribution to the specialty? And subsequently, through a chief medical officer role for radiation oncology at McKesson, while I was in that role, I was also on the ASTRO board, and my predecessor announced her retirement, and it was something that I'd never even thought about, but became aware of this opening and thought about it and said, okay, let me just throw my name in the ring. And frankly, never had any expectation of this resulting in the path that ended up coming open for me. So I would say that it was very much one of those opportune things that came at the right time. Having said all that, after taking the job on November 1, I have to tell you that this is a phenomenally exciting role. There's a lot of work, there's a lot of initiatives, but I'm having a wonderful time doing it. Sometimes in life, you reach a stage where having a new passion can, rejuvenate and re-energize your thought process, and I feel like that's what's happened for me. There are a lot of things that I want to do with Astro. I always use one slide in every talk that I give, and that is, what is Astro all about? And in my mind, there's only two things that Astro is about. One is advancing cancer care, and second is the safeguarding the essential role of radiation oncology. And those are the two things that I always focus on. And I tell my team that if there's any activity that we do, and if it cannot be directly attributed to one of those two goals, it's probably not a worthwhile use of our time or resources. The initial goals for the first year are membership relations. I think we want to get closer to our membership in all forms, freestanding, community-based practices, academic centers, large and small, hospital-based practices. Want to really dispel the notion that Astro is for academia. I think Astro is for everybody, and certainly hope to build those relationships. And I have initiated a series of road shows where I go to a variety of cities and try and meet as many of the practitioners and in as many of the environments as possible. A second area that I have been focusing in on is the financial stability of Astro. We've had the luxury of a well-performing long-term asset portfolio due to the market, but that portfolio is utilized to fund some of our ongoing expenses. I think we need to have certainly a certain amount of discipline around that. I also want to make sure that we are using our assets for growth initiatives and specialty enhancement initiatives so that we are investing in not only Astro's future, but the future of the specialty. Third, I have been working with our international committee to grow that part of our program in terms of membership, attendance at meetings, educational offerings around the world. And really, probably the most important thing is when we talk about health equity, it's hard for me to imagine a greater need for health equity in the cancer space than global oncology care, where the access and quality is often substantially different than it may be in North America. And so those are certain areas that I'm working aggressively at. We're also looking at our foundation, the Radiation Oncology Institute, to see how well we can coordinate the activities of the Institute with ASTRO itself. These are just a handful of things that we're involved in, that every time I think I know what the agenda is going to be, a new opportunity or challenge comes up, and next thing you know, the plate of important initiatives continues to broaden. But it's my job to ensure that we stay focused on a certain set of core tasks and see them to fruition. And then the final thing that I would mention that is absolutely mission critical right now is around the topic of reimbursement and our legislative initiatives in that area.
In addition to those goals you've just drawn out, which are a full agenda on their own, with so many rapid changes in federal healthcare policy recently, I imagine that coming into this new role as CEO of ASTRO has been a little bit of a trial by fire at moments. With so much coming at us rapidly, what have been ASTRO's priorities in response to some of the proposed shifts, like changing federal reimbursement, the indirect costs to do research, and budget cuts at the National Institutes of Health?
Well, the issue around federal reimbursement is one that is unfortunately a chronic one. This is not something that the recent changes have necessarily been the driving force, but it has been going on for the better part of a dozen years. And for a variety of reasons, we have been at the losing end of these reimbursement proposals during that time period. And if we look at the analysis that's been done by members of our team, the physician fee schedule in radiation oncology has gone down by roughly 23% over the last 10 years. The change in practice patterns with hypofractionation and the change in the indications for certain diseases. All of that has really impacted radiation oncology for physicians as well as the technical providers, whether they are freestanding centers or hospitals, and even academic centers. And so we, as a specialty, have suffered greatly with respect to these reimbursement challenges. There are a variety of reasons for that, and some of these are technical and quite mundane, but they do have an impact. The second thing is as reimbursement decisions are made, radiation oncology has not been treated kindly. ASTRO recognizes this and has been working at this now for several years, and our strategy for dealing with this is with respect to our proposal for the radiation oncology case rate, or as it is commonly known, ROCKR. This is designed to stabilize reimbursement in radiation oncology by changing reimbursement from individual fee-for-service codes to a bundled payment by diagnosis. We think we have a very strong proposal that has now been put forth in the Senate, and we have broad support across the community within ASTRO, collaborative organizations such as ACR, ACRO, ASCO, and a broad swath of our community, as well as our industry partners. And we're all in unison that stabilization of radiation oncology reimbursement is necessary, and that's the path that hopefully we're on at this time. We'll have to see how that plays out, and any legislative agenda, it can never be taken for granted, but certainly we're leaving no stone unturned and doing what we can to achieve success in this area. The second part of your question was around research funding and indirect costs. I think sometimes we get into a scenario where the historical terminology becomes problematic at some point in the future, and I don't know that indirect cost is necessarily the right way to term this. The United States has been at the forefront of medical research for many decades. We have a robust program of research that's funded often by the federal government and then also by industry partners. And it drives the ability for us to do things that perhaps nobody else can. And it also has been benefited greatly by attracting the best and brightest from around the world. And the term indirect funding implies that it's some sort of slap on, but in reality, what it is to help the institutions that do research to fund their infrastructure such that they're able to do so. So part of what we've got is a need to educate our lawmakers on what that really means. I'm hoping that they will see the light. The proposed cuts are potentially catastrophic for many institutions, and I fear would impact their ability to continue doing the quality of work that they're doing. So hopefully, with some time as things settle down and with adequate explanation and dialogue, we can explain what it is that this funding is used for, and not leave the impression that somehow it's a kind of a slush fund type of thing. And the last aspect of your question was the budget of the NIH. This is something of great concern to ASTRO. We have been strong advocates of funding for the NIH and the NCI, the DARPA program, and anything associated with healthcare research and specifically cancer research. As I said earlier, in my eyes, the primary reason for ASTRO to exist is to advance cancer care. And we strongly believe in robust funding because that is the way we advance cancer care. I remember about 25 years ago, when I was early in my career, the thought process was that roughly 58% of patients live long term or potentially are cured, and now we say that that is 68%. And if we think about that increase, it's a profound and phenomenal increase that all of us in the allied areas of cancer care should feel very proud of, and that has come through research across all specialties and all modalities. And I worry that if we reverse course, that this type of positive change will be blunted and potentially reversed. So we hope that this will be thought through and that the government will make wise decisions, but certainly we will continue to advocate for that.
So, on this note, I wanted to return to talk a little more about NRG Oncology and the NCI sponsored cooperative cancer groups. ASTRO has clearly been one of the most important advocates for these cooperative groups like NRG Oncology for a long time. And I'd like you to speak a little more about this relationship between ASTRO and NRG and what the interests are from Astro in NRG. I think many listeners out there might not realize that unlike many of the medical specialties where pharmaceutical companies might fund a huge amount of research, we really don't have that kind of industry support in a field like radiation oncology. What sort of work has been done by things like the ASTRO Government Relations Committee to specifically support our ability to do research through the cooperative groups?
Well, Stephen, as all of us know, most of the practice defining trials in radiation oncology have come through cooperative groups. And anybody in radiation oncology would know that. And as a result, ASTRO has always valued the role that RTOG and NRG has played. And this is an area that we have always collaborated on. And I'm happy to say that oftentimes there is great overlap between ASTRO leadership and participation in NRG and leadership in NRG. So that relationship is longstanding and it's been mutually beneficial and has been very collaborative. So that part of it has always been present. The cooperative groups absolutely depend on government funding, and in our advocacy, we always include that, and is something that is important to us. We also collaborate with NRG on individual projects. So, for example, we have a joint fellowship program called the NRG Oncology Healthcare Access Fellowship. And we have multiple activities where we cooperate at the ASTRO annual meeting. We have a clinical trial session. And many of the papers presented at the clinical trial session, as well as in our plenary session, are based on NRG projects. So for us, the health of NRG is critical to the health of radiation oncology, and we view it as a very symbiotic relationship, and we're always looking to enhance those types of ties. Lately, there has been a focus on the radiopharmaceutical space, and there's collaboration there as well.
We've talked about some of the short-term changes and challenges in the rapidly changing healthcare policy landscape. But with all of your background in healthcare policy, could you speak a little bit about what you see as the biggest long-term challenges for NRG oncology? We're not asking you, of course, to look into a crystal ball and try to predict the future, but what are the big long-term challenges that keep you up at night? And how does ASTRO and NRG Oncology need to rise to those challenges?
Well, certainly the most important area that we're concerned about, Lauren, is in regards to the federal funding, and we've talked about that. Another area where I do think that NRG has some challenges, and perhaps this is even amplified more since we started the dialogue with respect to private practitioners and community providers. NRG trials, when US Oncology, when I was a PI for the US Oncology Network, when we were highly successful, had large studies on common diseases. And even the less common diseases like GBMs, we did very, very well because these were large studies asking core questions on patient care and management. But over the years, I think those large trials have started going away, and the broad trials have started going away, and we're starting to get into more niche areas, smaller subgroups of patients, much more difficult entry criteria, much more difficult, initial workup and testing, things that are difficult for the non-academic provider to be able to enroll patients with. I think that is a challenge. But maybe one way to deal with that is to continue to explore trials in SBRT. various fractionation schedules, we are seeing a huge boom in the types of patients that are treated for SBRT. I suspect, not being an expert in this, but I suspect that there is a need for far greater eligibility and characterization of patients who are appropriate for various stereotactic techniques and treatments. In my opinion, that has become a little bit of the Wild West and probably needs a little bit more guidance and structure. I think NRG can be quite helpful in that. But the biggest challenge I would say is that NRG has to look at itself and see how we strike a balance. If we make the eligible subgroups so narrow and so small, it is very hard for a broad spectrum of clinicians to enroll patients. I think when I had the luxury of leading this program, we had trials that me and my colleagues could enroll large numbers of patients to. I think that's much harder today.
For those of us who might want to get involved with advocating for NRG oncology and cancer clinical research in general, what sort of avenues does ASTRO have on that front that you would recommend? How can Stephen and I get more involved?
Well, one thing I'll ask you in terms of your already busy plates, are you able to get involved with ASTRO in health policy and government relations, the Science Council? These are areas that I would encourage all radiation oncologists to consider participating in. We do have structured activities. We have an advocacy day. During advocacy day, we do go to the Hill and meet with as many representatives and senators' offices that we can. We do it by state, so you can actually meet with your representatives from your own state. In that, we're talking about reimbursement, we're talking about support for research, we're talking about policies that enhance care for patients. So that's one tangible way for you to get involved. Secondly, is, as I mentioned, to get involved in those committees. But, as radiation oncologists, we have to continue to work together. And the mission of NRG is central to the mission of radiation oncology. The mission of ASTRO, I think, is central to the mission of NRG. And to the extent that we can cross-pollinate and participate in mutual activities, I think it's a beneficial thing.
Dr. Kavadi, I don't know if you remember this, but about 10 years ago, we were on a plane ride back from NRG Oncology in Philadelphia to Houston. And on that plane ride, you told me that part of the reason you got involved with RTOG, now NRG Oncology, is that you wanted to do right by your former chair, the late Dr. James Cox. And you told me that if Jim were to walk through your clinic, you believed that he would be proud of what you had done. Who was Jim Cox to you, and what was his legacy to both ASTRO, NRG Oncology, and the legacy group RTOG?
As I look back, Stephen, at my career, I guess at some level I'm a bit old school and I view the generation before with a level of reverence that maybe is not as common today. But I go back to more than just Jim. If I look back at my time at MD Anderson in training, Lester Peters, Gunnar Zagars, Kian Ang, all of whom were phenomenal researchers and teachers. I stayed on faculty for a short time and then went into private practice, and I always felt a little bit of guilt that if I let people down, and even though nobody ever said anything directly, there was always that sense that maybe going into private practice was frowned upon. And in addition to those three, Jim was certainly a colleague and a mentor. We were on the lymphoma service together. And I knew that RTOG was near and dear to his heart, being the chair for the number of years that he was, and as well as ASTRO, being an ASTRO president and a gold medalist. But I always wanted my clinical practice to be such that all of those mentors, those four, and all the others at MD Anderson that I was close to and admired, could walk into my center and feel comfortable and supportive of whatever I was doing, and that was important to me. And on the RTOG front, what I really enjoyed was one day at an RTOG meeting. Jim walked across an entire ballroom to come to me and congratulate me and thank me for my support. This was the same day that Wally had shared a slide showing that US Oncology was the #1 accruing institution in our category at that time. So that meant a lot to me, and I feel like all of those mentors, Cox, Zagars, Ang, Peters, all of them were people that were committed to research, and it means a lot to be able to continue and do the activities that were part of their life's mission, and I hope have been part of mine in a different way. This ASTRO role is very much consistent with that desire to contribute to the specialty.
Our guest today was Dr. Vivek Kavadi, the new CEO of the American Society of Radiation Oncology, and also a longtime NRG Oncology supporter and investigator. Dr. Kavadi, thank you so much again for joining us and taking the time.
Thank you, Stephen, for the invitation. It was great to see you again. And Lauren, it was a pleasure to meet you, and I hope to see both of you soon.
The NRG Oncology Group is supported by grant funding from the National Cancer Institute, and content of this podcast does not necessarily reflect that of the National Institutes of Health. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and happy clinical trials.